All right. Our next speaker is Kirsty Badenoch. I hope I pronounced it right.
Oh, I love the French version.
Oh,
Much better.
I didn't know. Who's coming from London. She is, her practice is called Periscope, and she's also affiliated with the Bartlett School of Architecture. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Lovely to be here, and a really beautiful segue from choreography to unchoreography. So the talk I'm going to do today is about unchoreographing the drawing. The first disclaimer is that my name is up there, but I can't take sole responsibility for the drawings. So I started to name all the friends that were involved in these, but it took up the whole page. So I'm just for now calling them friends. It will become clear. So my research looks at drawing as a verb, an action, and a process. And I'm particularly interested in drawing of the landscape. In the same way that drawing is a kind of set of movements, then landscape is also such. Landscape consists of growth, entropy, tides, interactions, social communications, seasons, weather. It's a set of systems. Yet its language, and drawing language, is borrowed from architecture. So my investigation looks towards exploring a landscape-led language, a landscape-led approach to drawing, whereby the landscape participates rather than being represented, kind of processes that explore the landscape drawing itself or revealing itself. And in this approach, I see myself as a participant. So it's a lot about relinquishing control, a lot about exploration of a place through active drawing methods, and looking at open modes of drawing. So it's kind of working as well with landscape philosophies to do with ecosystems, ecologies, and a kind of humility on my part. So I'm going to today talk about three strains of inquiry and three sort of expeditions that discover three distinct landscapes. The vocabulary that I'm using is very much to do with language, to do with conversation, and I see these as dialogues. All of the drawings are forms of dialogues. So the first is to do with transcription, the second to do with scoring, and the third to do with dialogue. So the first method that I explored is called the garden transcript. And the site of this was the Japanese garden. So the traditional Zen Japanese gardens were never drawn. They were seen as ritualistic Buddhist enactments, so there was no need to prescribe them through the location or description of parts. They were the kind of tangible pieces that relayed the information were instruction manuals. So they were kind of maintenance regimes or kind of performance pieces that were to be enacted. So I saw these as kind of musical scores, as guidelines that weren't themselves visually representative of the place, but they would contain the information through which the person would then embody the space. So my drawing method was intrigued by this notion about how you can enact a space. And so I sort of embarked on 3 years worth of very large drawings, which looked to enact or transpose various pieces or various Japanese gardens. And so they're physical embodiments between my body, between ink, graphite, and paper. And they contain traces of my own actions. They contain transcriptions of the actual instructions from the translated manuscripts. They contain accidents, and they contain intuitive movements. So this drawing that you can see, it's a transcription of the 15th century garden of Rohan Yi, which I probably slaughtered. You might recognize from John Cage has done a lot of work with his own kind of compositions of chants. The space is a white gravel rectangle containing 15 rocks. It's empty. It's inaccessible to the public, apart from through the Buddhist practice, through the ritualization of care. You view it from a veranda. And the idea of this is it's this compositional silence. Obviously outside, in nature, the silence and order is impossible to maintain. And so the enactment or the process or the meditation of this garden is the impossibility of retaining a perfect space, and in thus doing so, an appreciation of the nature's intent. So twice a day, a monk will rake the same footsteps up and down this white rectangle. They will retread their own steps. They will retread the steps of 500 years of monks before them. And they will pick the leaves they will that have fallen, the nuts that a squirrel has left, any kind of interruption or accident that has sort of both disturbed but also created, in a way, this silence. And so my reenactments of these pace the same sheets of paper every day for 3 months. This one was actually pre-lockdown, so I have no excuse. And the actions and my own body and my own kind of movements are traced as I perform these actions. And so there becomes a sort of notation system for the parts that happen and my kind of embodiment or relationship or movements. So these pieces, they're left outside overnight. The idea is to allow disruption to happen. It rains, again, grasses get left, and each time something happens, then I'm recording the process of the thing that happens. It's also very important that the pieces are larger than I am, that I can occupy them spatially, and that I'm unable to see the whole piece at once. So maybe I'll jump back to this, because that kind of relates to the Japanese philosophy of the gardener being the garden themselves. And so my presence is crucial in these as I kind of trace my own footprints as they land. I mark the dates, which you can perhaps see better in some of these. And so it becomes this sort of record of my own embodiment of this space. The tools that I use for these are extracted from the site on which they're made. They kind of have their own signature, their own vocabulary. And so in a quite a direct way as well, the site is drawing itself as much as I am drawing it. And then something on time. I mentioned that these are very long drawings. There's something in my own enactment of these. And also the idea that nature as a concept in Eastern philosophy is looking for a state of permanent incompletion. And in that is considered a perfect state. And so I also have the disclaimer that none of these drawings are finished. The longest that I've worked on has been back and forth over 2 years. And I have about 30 of these pieces, which explore 3 gardens and kind of become this sort of accumulation of happenings and interpretations of one place. So the next project that I want to talk about, it kind of reflected on this first process as myself being very much the mediator for the landscape. And it was very much driven by instructions, but there was an amount where I was very aware of my own agency and the scale of my own body. And so the second project I want to talk about looks at a different approach where I stepped back from my own sense of self and strived to create an invitation for a landscape to draw itself. And to give further agency to other forces that weren't directly related to my own body. So this set of drawing investigations explore the boundary between land and water, and again, they're to do with allowing the landscape to act or to embody itself. So this is also a very personal journey. So the investigation started up in the Northern Hebrides, so the Inner Hebrides, so the very northwest of Scotland. This was also where I was born, and the expedition started with a journey back there with my mother, which was obviously quite a beautiful thing. And so my interest in this journey was to connect and to explore it and to understand this wild, rugged landscape that was really shaped by weather and wind and very kind of raw geological forces and weather forces. So the journey was me in a car with my mother on her birthday with a boot full of huge pieces of steel, which she thought were presents, and was very disappointed that they weren't, but also very happy because she's known me all her life and is very excited to come on my expeditions. So we journeyed along the coast. She was also my health and safety officer, which was probably a good thing. I was very keen to leave these pieces or to explore the waters right outside where we were staying. She was concerned about people being lacerated by huge pieces of steel, and so insisted that we walked for 3 hours along the rugged coastline. So again, I feel like the narrative of my own exploration into this landscape kind of became ingrained in the process and in the pieces. So the first site, oh sorry, I ruined it. The first site was Ganavan Sands, and it was this first kind of invitation to the ocean. And so I very naively kind of placed this sheet of steel in the border, or what I thought was the border between land and water. I then went back, and the next day we trod our same steps, and 13 hours later, this was the imprint or kind of voice of the landscape that had emerged. So I kind of was, again, I think my processes have involved discovery and kind of these moments of curiosity and then inquiry and then kind of openness, and to almost just see what happens very simply. But this was so intriguing to me because it kind of became, even though it was only 13 hours, this long exposure of all the forces and the interactions that had happened on the landscape. You got the splashes, the pebble, the rain, the kind of different densities and intensities and kind of action and emergencies as well within this piece. And perhaps a coincidence, but also quite satisfyingly, the oxidation and the color of the landscape, they kind of became very much ingrained into one another, and that you could see the process was a sort of microcosm of a much longer geological or kind of environmental set of forces. So I was quite happy and went to the next site, which was kind of amazingly one of the oldest geological formations in the world. It's 2,800 million years old. So it's the island of Iona. It's a place of deep time. I didn't have deep time. I had a day. So this piece, again, was 14 hours. But what became incredibly striking to me was just in 14 hours how you could see or understand these forces that were happening over an incredible amount of time. So you can see the tide line where it was put initially, and the undercut of the rock, and how halfway across you have this kind of line that follows the existing rock face, and how over this 2,800 million years, in 14 hours, you can actually see the enactment of this force happening. So they really acted as ways to understand these processes that I was perhaps aware of or had been told about in fact manner, but to actually experience them was kind of a fantastic exploration. And so to a much less romantic landscape of East London, but was very keen to continue developing this process in the same way that the Buddhist Japanese drawings, they were an embodiment. They kind of required the ritualistic act of me doing this thing over and over and over to uncover something. I sort of re-embodied or wanted to expand this way of working. So the closest river to me is the River Lee. It's a historic trade route. It's been canalized and has a much less romantic sort of situation as well to the Hebrides. But it has this kind of mashup between being home to very endangered species of kingfishers, crayfish, dragonflies that are kind of iridescent, and similarly a lot of dodgy parties. It's known as Hackney Beach. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of plastic cups kind of strewn in summer. There's shopping trolleys, kind of you can see some of the industrial debris, and it's also has sewage leakages into it. So it's both incredibly romantic. It's only naturalized for a very short strip. It's a kind of breathing space in London, but it also has this kind of industrial constituents that you can't escape from. And so for me, again, it became an opportunity to interact with the landscape and to understand it, this sort of conversation space and an adventure. And so this series, it moved from 24 hours to the longest one was 160. They happened from December last year to March this year. And when I talk about friends at the beginning, the river definitely became one of my friends. through this exploration. And so for me, it really became a way to understand the river system through the repetition of these acts. There were some where the storms would mean that I couldn't access the water for days and was quite frustrated. There I lost two, but that sort of became, if I'm at the time, frustrating, but also if you're going to open yourself up to processes, then that sort of became part of it. And so retrospectively, I was quite happy that that happened. I understood things about the river bend and turbulence on the outer to the inner. I understood how the weir system would be controlled and let loose to do with weather predictions. And so suddenly I started to get this very strange knowledge of if I could see a storm was coming in 2 days, then I understood the system of weirs and how they'd open for flooding further up the city. And so just through this, I sort of understood layers or uncovered layers through these explorations. Also on they're two-sided. So this was water-facing, and then this was bank-facing. And again, you understood the kind of this sort of soft space between land and water and how this faces, thank you, were enacting differently, or forces were enacting differently. It's not glamorous. I spent many winter mornings covered in mud, being shouted at by dog walkers who told me that I was poisoning myself, and that yeah, this was some of the excitement, I guess. But then over these 3 months, okay, yeah, and sorry, some of the details as well. It kind of started to reveal a notation set of speeds of the water, of interactions and entanglements. The one on the right, for example, is a load of algae that started growing. This piece was placed at the bank, at the roots of a river birch, and it was a bit, yeah, I questioned myself the amount of iridescent bubbles that were coming out of the water at that point. But you start to sort of see the interactions between biological matter, between water, between living and growing pieces, entropy, moments of pivot. You can just about see it in this one, but there was a moment where the force of the flood tipped the plate, and so it actually had one imprint, and then it had the same sort of 30-degree angle. And so it started over time to build up this kind of system of events, this sort of index of the river. And there's a lot of data behind them, obviously obsessively, as architects are. I have a million Excel spreadsheets with weather, with tide information, with, yeah, the kind of durational of each piece, and photographs of each time I went to visit them as well. Okay, I've used a lot of time on those, but perhaps this last one is quite a quick one because it's using a very different medium. It looked at, I think the second piece or line of inquiry that I showed was opening myself to non-human collaboration. This one is looking towards opening up to human collaboration and a different sort of dialogue between people and the land. So yeah, this is a kind of investigation into people and place. The site, which Nat has visited for sure, and Penelope, I'm not sure if she's online, is a permaculture garden in East London where they grow and cook and eat their own food. It's zero waste, and I was really interested again in this land system, this circular system, and reinserting something back into its own site. So this is an event that took place on Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day every year where humanity's resource consumption exceeds the Earth's capacity to replenish it. So there was a bigger scale, again, idea of this circular kind of commodification of the land. The collaborators here were chefs, gardeners, and guests. And so it was an event. So what you're seeing here are photographs of that. It started with introducing the collaborators to the state of mind through which we wanted to draw. So we recited the food around the garden. There was a walk involved, and then we kind of collected and laid out the elements from the garden to form this dinner. So here the canvas is a white tablecloth. This kind of became the invitation in the same way that the steel sheets were inviting the water, then the tablecloth is inviting human. I'll hurry up a little bit. There's no crockery, which removed the boundaries between people. It created this shared space and this kind of environment of exchange. And then this I wasn't so sure of. This was very choreographed, but the chefs loved it, so that's theirs. But maybe actually a little bit in the vein of Nat's splatting paint, then this ended up creating green pesto over everyone, and there were these sort of performative moments of using the site materials to explore. And then the dinner happened. So this was the unchoreographed part. This was inviting messiness, play, and kind of dialogue through sharing. And slowly this drawing kind of emerged, or the traces of the event kind of emerged upon the tablecloth. And so it's kind of beautiful, it's kind of grotesque. The tools we finally extracted, these empty spaces, this idea of things that were there for a long amount of time compared to these sudden gestures. Again, there's kind of the movement of mark making and impact and how solid or permeable that is. And then they were reinserted in the site in the spirit of the zero waste, and they were exhibited within the greenhouse where the event happened. I guess just a couple of small reflections as I was putting them together. And I think there was something about the personal and experiential landscape, also this kind of accumulative and collaborative and sort of open sort of aim towards these drawings. There's a difficulty, I think, in showing these on screen. There's the pencil drawings or graphite drawings in particular, they're emerging over time. There's a kind of level of detail that's quite difficult to get across, so I apologize for that, but there may be a drawing that emerges at the end of the day, let's see, which is this setup here. And yeah, I didn't bring anything physical, but in lockdown, kind of similar to Michael, there was not much to do, so I made a book. So then this is an anthology within which Nat and Penelope, again, actually part of, and this has kind of looked at alternative ways of reading the land and landscape processes, which kind of also maybe more theoretically contextualize some of the things that I've shown today. Thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering, with the metal plates that you use, after it has got these marks of like a passage, it's in the same time like photography of a mineral like deposits, but does, sorry, I'm wondering if they keep evolving after you got them out of their environment where they captured that moment, and if it's something that you kind of like, or if you have tried to fix that, like we would do to protect like a drawing or something of a moment captured at the moment.
Yeah, it was really difficult because when they come out, they're completely iridescent and they still have biotic matter kind of growing on them. So at that point, they feel alive. Over time, the color falls back and it becomes something slightly more homogeneous. So I've tried varnishes and oil-based thing, and it's dulled them too much. I feel like it's something that I battle with a little bit because it's about the process without sounding too obvious, that rather than the artifact at the end, I also wondered whether the documentation of them at the point of emergence is actually more important than the thing afterwards. Over time, they're getting scratched as I move them around, but I'm also perhaps not too worried about that because it's kind of, again, part of this personal journey, and I am an agent in this. So yeah, I mean, I've purposefully shown all of them, apart from the index, on the site that made them. And so I have wondered whether that's actually perhaps more the thing, or the drawing rather than the plate.
Thank you.
If someone had to do it, it had to be you. Thank you for doing it first.
Thank you, Kirsty, very much. And just a thought was triggered. I was thinking about animals that, through territorialization or mating rituals and so on, that inscribe the landscape, and then it's a small observation. I wondered if they're super interestingly authored from your, let's say, your perspective, your body, And I wondered if you could become an animal or a microorganism or a passing cloud as a way to reveal additional, let's say, characteristics of the landscape. It's a sort of a Perry thing, but it's
beautiful.
triggered, a number of things were triggered in terms of authorship questions and control and discipline and rigor and not. Yeah, so it's not really a question, but thank you very much for the really, really beautiful work and setup.
Thank you very much.
We have one, and this will be the last one. We have a question up from the computer. Kirsty, I appreciated the chance and outside intervention or collaboration in each piece. I particularly appreciate the fact that you are able to talk about them as a system of events and are able to find a sense of togetherness in a way to the pieces, thinking here particularly of the metal sheets project. You show 3 very different ways of unchoreographing, but all need a certain amount of preparation, thus of choreographing. Does your choreography disappear during the collaboration, or do you feel the need to go back to the plan at certain points?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. There is no plan to go back to. So there aren't sketches, they are what they are, and they happen as they evolve. So I think, trying to remember the first part of the question. I think that perhaps the metal sheets, particularly at the beginning, I felt a real relinquishing of agency. And the moments that really allow that don't come from yourself. Like sometimes you decide to go and pick them out at a certain time. Sometimes I think it was moments where the rainfall had become so high that the tide was up and I couldn't collect it, and then I had to wait 3 more days until I could. It was those kind of glimpses which are usually come with frustration, where I felt that it was perhaps being most true to the intent.